The White House is now Israeli-occupied territory. They have full reign over the president's foreign policy in the Middle East. Netanyahu is calling the shots, and I think that's very unfortunate. We're supposed to be a world superpower, and yet we have small powers like the Israel, still a great power, but a small country. And then, a medium power in Ukraine that is a non-nuclear state where Zelensky has been able to basically call the shots on Trump's Russia foreign policy. And it's very much against U.S. national security interests to do so.
Hello everybody, this is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking again to David Pyne, a former US Army officer currently serving as Deputy Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He's also the author of the popular Substack, The Real War, on which he analyzes international affairs and US national politics. David has been observing let's call it the MAGA base, or the movements within the Republican Party ever since Trump first came on the political scene. And today we want to talk about what the current move toward war with Iran and the new third Gulf War did to this constituency. But first of all, we are talking today on June 24th, David's evening of June 23rd. And David, we've just learned that apparently the US, Iran and Israel are looking toward winding down the conflict, aren't they?
Well, I haven't heard that Israel's interested in doing that, so that would be hopeful if they were serious. Based on their actions, I seriously doubt their any sincere interest in peace. I know that Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, has been, he started this war. It was an unprovoked war of aggression against Iran, based on false pretenses that Iran was, on the verge of developing nuclear weapons, and that as soon as they had nuclear weapons, they would attack Israel. But certainly it does seem very hopeful that the U.S. and Iran are winding down hostilities, given that the Iranian response was really a best case scenario where they responded, attacked a U.S. military base in Qatar that has already been evacuated with no U.S. casualties, similar to the way they responded after Soleimani, except in that instance there were many casualties, but there were no killed, no U.S. troops killed. So that's kind of Trump's red line, as I understand it. And Trump's latest tweet seems to be kind of indicating that he's willing to implement kind of a unofficial ceasefire with Iran if they discontinue their attacks, or if none of their attacks today, some of which are still expected in Iraq, kill any U.S. troops.
Right. So since this story is developing as we're speaking, let's put this aside for the moment and hope for the best. But how did you perceive the last couple of weeks and months as this conflict was building up and the rhetoric was getting worse, and the support by the United States for Israel's wishes and war was intensifying? Because this was everything that Donald Trump was rallying against, right? And Marjorie Taylor Greene broke very publicly with him. What's within the MAGA movement, the sentiment?
Well, it's fracturing the MAGA movement. There's the Trump loyalists that are, diehards that, he could start World War III with Russia tomorrow, and they would still support that and say it's America first. And then there are folks that are really committed to the America first cause that are, put country ahead of political leaders. They're willing to put the interests of the United States of America ahead of any leader, including Donald Trump, and that would include myself. But you're right. President Trump ran on a platform of putting America first, ending all the forever wars, and preventing new ones from happening. And he's really 0 for 3 on that. He started out with very promisingly, having successfully helped to negotiate a ceasefire with Israel and Hamas the day before he was inaugurated. That was done with his emissary Steve Witkoff, that was able to get that signed. But then he proceeded to support Israel in violating that 2 months later, and then of course his abortive attempts to make peace with Russia and end the war in Ukraine. and he issued a 22-point peace plan on April 21st to NATO and to Ukraine, and then subsequently submitted that to Russia, and Russia rejected it, and then he gave up on that. And then of course, he proceeded to fight an unnecessary war against Yemen, against the Houthis, which occupy the central and most capital areas of the country. And that was a war that we lost. We essentially accepted the Houthis' peace terms, which they had been pushing, which is simply that they would not attack U.S. ships in the Red Sea, but they were free to attack anyone else, including the Israelis. And then of course, he'd been planning. He had the 60-day ultimatum with Iran, and essentially they would have to capitulate to U.S. terms, which is that they could have no enrichment capability within Iran. They could have no centrifuges, and that was kind of the minimum terms. And then he's since added a significant degrading of their long-range missile capabilities. And Iran, of course, rejected that. They did provide a substantive 5-point nuclear deal that they hoped that we would accept. It was basically the JCPOA plus heightened verification measures. And I thought it was a reasonable deal. I thought that Trump should accept it, but he rejected it. He refused to negotiate. There was reportedly just before the Israeli attack, there was some movement in terms of the two sides, some hope that at the sixth round of talks that were scheduled for June 14th would be successful. But of course, Netanyahu decided to pull the trigger and attack Iran in this unprovoked way on June 13th, decapitating the Iranian leadership. It was done, military leadership rather, and hitting a lot of their nuclear targets and other air defenses and various other targets. It was done with full U.S. complicity. Trump provided them he greenlighted the attack, something that no U.S. president had done since Israel first asked for U.S. permission to attack Iran back during the Bush years, and provided so-called exquisite intelligence, according to one news site. All the U.S. intelligence, all the intelligence necessary to target and kill Israeli generals, and other intelligence to successfully, make those strikes be successful. And this whole time, it turns out, based on news stories I've read today and yesterday, that way back on June 8th, he held a meeting in Camp David with his national security principals, excluding Tulsi Gabbard, who's really the lone voice, or rather the most principled voice against going to war with Iran, and essentially finalized what became this June 21st U.S. air and missile strike against Iran's, 3 of Iran's 34 nuclear sites, including their main nuclear enrichment facility at Fordow, which is buried deep underground, from anywhere from 80 to 150 meters. And then while he was negotiating, continuing good faith negotiations with the Iranians, obviously they were derailed temporarily by the attacks. There was also some back and forth between the Trump administration and Iran, where Iran was wanting to negotiate during the Israeli strikes earlier last week. There was some plans maybe to send J.D. Vance and Steve Witkoff to meet with the Iranians last Monday, but they couldn't get a hold of the Ayatollah Khomeini because he was understandably very concerned about being assassinated by Israel. And so the talks failed. And at that point, Trump decided to basically greenlight these attacks somewhere earlier last week, and gave a warning. He claimed that there was going to be 2 weeks warning, but in fact, he did actually reportedly notify the Iranians on Thursday or thereabouts that of the 3 sites that he planned to attack. He didn't disclose the timing, but Iran apparently was successful in withdrawing safely, evacuating all their nuclear scientists, as well as their weapons-grade enriched uranium from all 3 sites. And so, the U.S. bombs fell on evacuated targets, causing serious damage to those targets, but I've seen no evidence that any one of those three were destroyed. And in fact, I'm very doubtful on any claims that two of them were.
So, I mean, the military part aside, and the assessments, how much damage was done, and how much of this was announced or unannounced, expected, unexpected, that will probably come out over the next weeks and months, or maybe years once the historians get into the archives. But the shift in rhetoric between the promises during the campaign trail, which you followed very closely, and now the actual deeds that we see, half a year, not even half a year in office. How do you think this is now this is being received on the ground? I mean, in terms of percentage, how big a part of the MAGA constituency will now thoroughly feel alienated? And maybe one more question: Tulsi Gabbard, of course, a few days ago, she backtracked. She sent out a tweet saying like, "Oh, no, no, actually, we have intelligence that says Iran is only weeks away." Are you interpreting this as her uh, just following what's currently the pressure getting to her, or do you interpret this as her basically lying to the general public in order to stay on the good side of Mr. Trump? Did she actually flip, or is this just a lie of convenience?
It's a spin, it wasn't a lie. Tulsi Gabbard actually, her two statements were not at all inconsistent. What she testified to during March in her confirmation hearings was that Iran, had they weren't they had not made a decision. The Ayatollah had not made a decision to develop nuclear weapons, and that they essentially had got rid of the nuclear program in 2022. I happen to think that assessment is incorrect. Her new statement said that if Iran did make the decision to develop nuclear weapons, they would be weeks or months from doing so. And either way, both times she said Iran has no plans to develop a nuclear weapon. So uh, she's right about. I mean, she's right in terms of there's no urgency. I believe that Iran has had nuclear weapons. They have not used them. They've been, obviously been a responsible nuclear power covertly, like Israel. No one's used nuclear weapons since 1945, since America's, unprovoked, well, not provoked, or a provoked attack, I guess, on Japan, but it was a war crime, of course, destroying two Japanese cities, killing 140,000 Americans. And Tulsi Gabbard gave a great video on that presentation on that. She very much exaggerated the number of dead in the Hiroshima bombing attack. She said 300,000 when it's probably about a quarter of that. But everything else she said was absolutely correct. We're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been before, and it's in large part due to President Trump's decision to not only continue Biden's extremely dangerous policies of fighting a war against Russia and Ukraine, but expand on that with a potential war against another nuclear power in the Middle East.
Yes, and now the the cabinet of Mr. Trump, has also been this very eclectic mix of people, and also the chief negotiators in the recent past, right? On the one hand, Mr. Witkoff, and on the other hand, Mr. Kellogg. They have different visions, or they had different approaches. The 22-point peace plan is actually an idea of Mr. Kellogg, and has been widely criticized as basically overstepping almost every single red line the Russians have been putting out there for at least the last 1.5 years. Um, the But Mr. Witkoff seems to have had a much more pragmatic approach, actually, also when dealing with the Russians and the Iranians. Do you foresee a shift within the cabinet rather toward this Witkoff position? Also, looking that Mr. Waltz was already like sent away quite a while ago, but at the same time, we still have Hegseth, who's a arch neocon as Minister of Defense. We have Rubio, who's also rather in that corner. We have J.D. Vance, who has shown a rather an in-between position, but overall, when it came to the war with Iran, all of them were like rallying behind Mr. Trump. What's your take?
Well, I don't necessarily agree with everything you said. I think that Vice President Vance and Defense Secretary Hegseth are more on the America First side, more on the restorator side. Obviously, of course, Hegseth has made some, he made a tweet some while back, probably a couple months ago. I think it was back in March against Iran. That was seemed very adolescent, but what I've heard behind the scenes is that he's been a voice of reason against the bombing of Iran, and that in some cases, like Tulsi Gabbard, he's been more marginalized from Trump's inner circle. Trump has relied more on Rubio, Secretary of State, as well as CIA Director Ratcliffe, and then a couple of generals, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, as well as General Kurilla, who's a CENTCOM commander, very close to the Israelis. In fact, there was a really good, and I'm sure you've seen it, very good article, expose in Gray Zone a couple days ago. Basically talked about how Ratcliffe was Israel's stenographer. Essentially he would get briefed by the Israeli intelligence. They tell him what to say, and then he regurgitated all to President Trump, and President Trump bought all the lies about, we had to attack Iran immediately because they were within 2 weeks of developing nuclear weapons, and as soon as they developed a nuclear weapon or produced one, they would use it against Tel Aviv or New York City. Uh, you know, Unfortunately, the truth, I think that's true. I think that the neocons are essentially the White House is now Israeli occupied territory. They have full reign over the president's foreign policy in the Middle East. And Netanyahu is calling the shots, and I think that's very unfortunate. We're supposed to be a world superpower, and yet we have small powers like the Israel, like still a great power, but a small country, and then a medium power in Ukraine that is a non-nuclear state, that where Zelensky has been able to basically call the shots on Trump's Russia foreign policy, and it's very much against U.S. national security interests to do so because. In addition to military strength, it's very important for the U.S. to have good relations with Russia, with China, with North Korea, and Iran, principally because those are the enemies that have the potential to destroy us, either with cyber attack or potentially with even nuclear or super EMP attack. And our relations have really not been all that great with those countries since Trump took over.
No, not at all. And the question is how to improve it. And Donald Trump seemed very adamant about improving the relationship with Russia, even against the wishes of the arch neocons. And this also includes, of course, in Congress, people like Lindsey Graham. And there's this constant threat that this group might assemble enough power in order to impeach the president. Right? That is also a reality that's going on. Although right now, that majority is definitely lacking, but there's the Damocles sword of the midterms, of course, looming. Do you think that this current episode, even if it's wound down, even if the third Gulf War is avoided, that this will impact the midterms and actually strengthen the opposition to Mr. Trump on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I think it's very likely that we'll see a downturn in terms of MAGA voters turning out for Republicans over Trump's increasing number of broken promises, particularly as relating to peace and war and foreign policy. And I think we'll see. I can almost guarantee the Democrats are going to take over the House. Obviously the polls don't support it yet. Current polls show the Republicans would retain control of both houses, but in terms of historical midterms, the second midterm, I think it's usually the party in power loses about 28 House seats and about 4 Senate seats. So if we were to hew to those averages, the Republicans would be out of power in both houses of Congress. I still think there's, before this happened, I thought the Republicans had about a 50% chance of retaining control of the Senate. But either way, whether they do or not, the Democrats will be in a power position to impeach Trump the third time. And Trump's giving them a lot of reasons, a lot of different impeachment articles they could use to impeach him over.
But I mean, the sad thing is, of course, that even with such an impeachment, we would not look at a less belligerent. We wouldn't have a less belligerent outlook because, again, like part of the opposition is by people who think that Mr. Trump isn't doing enough, isn't fighting enough with Russia, isn't pushing far enough with Iran. especially now the whole regime change crowd for Iran got really, really excited, didn't they? And they're going to be like disappointed if this war actually ends. The drive on Capitol Hill, not only for the use of weapons in the whole military-industrial complex, but also, of course, the Israel lobby. They maintain a very, very strong grip over the entire system, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. APAC is basically it's an Israeli lobbying firm, and they should be registered under FARA as foreign agents. And they donate massive amounts of money. I mean, even to America First conservatives, such as one of my senators here where I live. Uh, and that money is, it develops a lot of influence. I think it impacts the way people vote. Folks like Elon Musk, a massive billion in the most richest man in the world, is afraid to criticize Israel. He's been silent on this whole, the Israeli bombings of Iran, and of course the U.S. bombing of Iran that I've seen to date. And most of us America First conservatives have concluded it's because of the power of the Israeli lobby. He doesn't want to be found on their bad side because it could be bad for business. He's already seen what could happen when he got on the bad side of the wrong side of Trump, and Trump threatened to take away, I think, tax exempt status for SpaceX or Tesla or whatever it was he did. But yeah, there's tremendous pressure from the Israeli lobby. It's the most powerful lobby, as Dr. John Mearsheimer and Stephen Wald wrote in their book about the Israeli lobby. I think it was 35 years ago. It's very excessive, and Israel controls probably as many or likely even more politicians than Communist China does in Congress.
This capture of the US political system that spans across party lines is, of course, also what's responsible then for the system to constantly pivot towards warfare. We also saw in the last couple of days, weeks, how the US media system was beating the drums of war, and actually, resuscitating this narrative of the weapons of mass destruction. I mean, this was very, very reminiscent, or is very reminiscent of Iraq. And do you see that this is also still working, or are we actually seeing some different outcomes now that we also have the whole social media factor in the entire pot? What's your perception of how this pro-war media lies were effective or not?
Well, I think they're highly effective, as President Putin stated during an interview, I think, with Tucker Carlson in February of, I think it was 2024. He basically stated that he was asked about Russian propaganda and its effectiveness, and he said, "Well, we can't even compete. The U.S. Western propaganda machine is better than probably what the Soviets had during the Cold War in terms of its effectiveness, its ability to brainwash people." To believe all the war propaganda lies being sold to them by the neocons, the neoliberals, and the Ukrainians and the Israelis. And it's very unfortunate. When I turn on the TV, I'll watch Fox News quite frequently, and it's basically an Israeli lobby channel, as Steve Bannon, former CEO of the Trump 2016 presidential campaign, has stated, where they're basically just broadcast Israeli propaganda 24/7 with few exceptions. And it's just amazing, the level of stupidity and idiocy that I'm hearing out of our members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, neocons. And we've seen like 82 senators sign on to the secondary tariff bill from Lindsey Graham that would put 500% to 1,000% tariffs on any country that trades with Russia. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the idiocy and the foolishness that we have in the U.S. government. And it's the Congress is even worse than the White House. I mean, Trump at least has some good instincts and some good ideas that he came to office with, but he picked a lot of really bad advisors. I mean, his decision to pick Waltz as national security advisor and now Rubio as his replacement, and as well as Secretary of State. and then of course Radcliffe at CIA and Huckabee for ambassador to Israel, and so many others, has been just really poison and sabotage all of his great America First foreign policy agenda of real peace, peace through strength that has that's actually peace. The neocons have tried to hijack that Reagan term of peace through strength, but they don't support the peace part. They support military strength. They basically support war. And that's what, you could see that with Vance and Rubio, just, on the talk shows yesterday morning, where they were asked if we were at war with Iran, and they said, no, we're not at war with Iran. Well, I'm sorry, but bombing other countries is an act of war. And if you don't believe that, listen to FDR's speech after Pearl Harbor, where Japan just bombed us one time, and then they didn't do anything else and waited for our response. And FDR, had a declaration of war before Congress just days later.
Yeah, but this is a very important point, and actually one that we need to discuss also beyond this podcast here. The U.S. Constitution clearly gives war-making powers to Congress. It's not with the president, it's with Congress. It's one of the ways in which the U.S. Constitution is a very intelligent document that tries to constrain this most strongest of all powers and distribute it at least over the heads of several people and not just one. Now, unfortunately, in 1919, 28, and 45, we 3 times outlawed war under international law. We 3 times said no more war. War doesn't exist anymore. War itself is illegal. Which is why the United States since 45 hasn't declared war on anyone. It's illegal. You don't do that. But de facto, you just continue doing war, right? There is war, and this is an act of war. This was the US president that authorized an act of war. But since he can frame it as not an act of war, because the US doesn't do war, it's just an intervention, it's just an operation, he doesn't need Congress. Now, do you see any way in which Congress can get its power back and say, like, no, not just declarations of war, but also acts of war need to come back? Because Ocasio-Cortez actually put out a tweet to that extent, but it seems unlikely that this will have consequences, although this is, of course, a major issue in my view.
Well, you're right. I mean, they have to. It would have to rescind the 1973 War Powers Resolution, which essentially, was meant to be a constraint on the power of the president to make war, but in fact gives the president the ability to essentially wage war for 2 to 3 months before Congress has a say as to whether to stop it or defund it. So that's a very important change, because, of course, the Trump White House did cite the War Powers Resolution, where they simply notified Congress as the attacks were occurring, and they said that made it legal under the War Powers Resolution, which essentially was ceding congressional war-making authority in part to the president unconstitutionally. So, unfortunately, Congress has done that quite a bit. They've ceded quite a bit of power to the executive branch, and that's why we call it the imperial presidency here in the U.S. Because they've made the president almost a quasi king in terms of his power to make war and to do other things legislatively, for example, that the founding fathers never thought he should be allowed to do, and try to constrain him from doing under the U.S. Constitution. But in terms of getting something passed, I mean, the Massey Ocasio-Cortez resolution, it looks like that's being sabotaged by Speaker Johnson. Speaker Johnson's trying to amend it to make it a non-privileged resolution. And when a House resolution is non-privileged, it doesn't have to be heard. It doesn't have to be brought to the floor. So I'm, skeptical that will be able to even be heard on the House floor, let alone passed. I think the Democrats would unite behind that, just because they hate Trump, not so much that they oppose this war, but it's very dangerous. This is not. There was no immediate urgency to attack Iran. There's no evidence. No evidence has been presented that Iran was not only 2 weeks away, but from developing nuclear weapons, but that they had any plans or intention to use them. Nuclear deterrence has worked for every country, every enemy, even our most determined enemies, the Soviet Union, communist China, which during its early years was much more radical. I mean, in terms of threatening war, threatening to nuke U.S. cities, although it's much more powerful now. And of course, North Korea and now Iran. Nuclear deterrence works. It works unless we try to do regime change operations. If we try to, I think that Iran's nuclear red line is likely if we try to assassinate the Ayatollah. In fact, it's possible if he may have left orders with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps that if he's assassinated, then uh, maybe that Iran might have to. The RGC might be in charge of a massive cyber attack or even some kind of super EMP attack on the U.S.
Yes.
So essentially, we're instead of removing existential threats to the U.S. and Israel, we're actually maximizing the threats.
Yes, precisely. And part of what enables this is, of course, the fact that the imperial presidency, the heightened power of the United States, puts all of this war-making power into the hands of really just a few heads in the White House instead of a deliberate discussion within Congress. And ironically, all of this makes proliferation much more likely because one of the largest casualties of this Iran-Iraq U.S. war, to me, is the Non-Proliferation Treaty because it got hugely damaged now with the acts from I would say the U.S. side of attacking these three nuclear sites. What's your assessment on that one?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's no greater incentive than to try to get enemy countries to develop nuclear weapons and build nuclear arsenals than when they see a country that purportedly doesn't even have nuclear weapons that the U.S. and Israel are trying to bomb mercilessly and unprovoked to ostensibly prevent them from having nuclear weapons. I I would say that if Iran, made the decision to publicize some kind of limited nuclear capability, if they'd invited U.S. or even IAEA inspectors to show up to an underground nuclear test, that we wouldn't be seeing this. And we wouldn't. Would the U.S. and Israel attack a declared nuclear power that had demonstrated some kind of nuclear test capability? I don't think so. And so, every country in the world that thinks they might be on the receiving end of conventional U.S. or Israeli bombing strikes is going to be thinking about how we can accelerate their nuclear program. And certainly, I can almost guarantee that Iran has that in mind. If indeed it's they don't have nuclear weapons, we've given them all the reason to accelerate their nuclear weapons program instead of dismantle it.
I absolutely agree. I mean, this is doing the exact opposite. This was uh, every state in the world that thinks it's going to be on the chopping block will now have to rethink its entire nuclear doctrine. So we are entering a new era because we've hadn't this level of escalation. It's even already Russia attacking Ukraine was making that argument to some extent, and you saw people in Europe and the US making that argument. But it gets even stronger now that we see that the greatest power on the planet is willing to shoot at nuclear facilities, just like prohibited under international law. But that's also an option. So which of course the Iranians say, look, we have the right under the NPT to have these facilities. These facilities are not illegal, they're not immoral, they're just part and parcel of the right of being part of the NPT. So what point is the NPT if then suddenly one of the signatory states, nuclear weapon states, says like, okay, we deem we don't want you to have this, we'll bomb it, even though you have the right to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what we're doing is we're setting a precedent for Iran and our other enemy countries to bomb and terror strike our own nuclear reactors. Because if we don't care about bombing their nuclear reactors and nuclear enrichment facilities, then and potentially having a cloud, a radioactive cloud of radioactive particulates over Iran, then what objection can we have if terrorists, state sponsors of terror attack and destroy our own nuclear plants? So it's a terrible precedent. It's illegal under international law. We ostensibly claim to be the world's example of freedom and democracy and peace, and the so-called liberal rules-based order. But as I've said for many years now, it's a rule-based international orders with U.S. rules that we frequently violate. And so if you have a country setting the rules, and it violates it all the time, then what incentive do we have for other countries to abide by our rules?
Actually, I find it funny because rules-based international order, I find it, after thinking about it, I find it's a quite honest approach, because what it actually means is that the US makes rules for others that it orders them to obey. That's that's of course my interpretation. But let me ask you something else, and this is pure speculation because there's no way that one of us could know. But do you think that the fact that we've learned now that conventional strikes against Iran and Israel are possible, and neither Iran nor Israel have the capacity to intercept those, that this is also changing the game, because the United States also managed to just fly its bombers over Iran and then hit these sites, but the Iranians also managed to hit basically any target they chose within a country that has been priding itself of having an Iron Dome and all of these defense mechanisms and being so well protected. But it's obviously now it's obvious that this is untrue, which means that even the nuclear facilities in Israel are potential targets, right? But the Iranians didn't do that. They didn't shoot at these facilities. But do you think that there was a threat of that happening, and so that even if Iran doesn't have nuclear facilities, the fact that Israel has them and that they could be blown up, that this specter of mutually assured destruction on both sides suddenly emerges again? Or am I going too far with this trajectory?
Yeah, it sets a terrible precedent. Obviously, it's not unprecedented to have two nuclear powers shooting each other. We've seen it with India and Pakistan as recently as I think last month. But in the case of Iran and Israel, both sides have nuclear reactors. Both sides have nuclear production or enrichment facilities. There was a strike by Iran just last year. I think it was April of 2024. Where they came very close to hitting Israel's main nuclear production facility. And so definitely they have that option. And if this war continues and Israeli attacks continue to escalate on Iran, certainly if they attempt to, some kind of assassination attempt on the Ayatollah, I have no doubt that Iran will target Israel's nuclear facility and seriously damage it.
This changes to me like what these with also nuclear weapon states how they have to do their planning, right? It's not just Iran and so on that's going to bury this under hundreds of meters of stone from now on. I mean, this must actually be also for everybody else, telling them that they need to put these weapons and these materials far underground from now on, because to me, like the reactor, the Israeli reactor is actually in the desert, but relatively out in the open as a facility, isn't it?
It is, yeah. They've never felt threatened. They've never felt they had a need to bury those facilities because they were developed many years ago, before Iran became one of the world's premier nuclear capable missile powers, where they have a ballistic missile force which is likely larger than the United States. Of course, their missiles are mostly short and medium range missiles, whereas our missiles are mostly strategic. But they have many thousands of these missiles that they can hurl at Israel, and I think they've launched at least over 1,000 thus far. I think initially they were estimated to have about 3,000 total, of which 1,000 were longer range. But the other missiles, the other 2,000 plus, could be launched from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, where Iraq, of course, is now led by a very friendly Iranian proxy government, thanks to Bush's foolish invasion of Iraq in 2003, which killed off Iran's main rival, number one enemy in the world, Saddam Hussein, and transformed a secular country that was loosely aligned with the West into Islamic regime that's literally has a treaty of alliance with Iran.
Yeah, the ironies of these follies of these warmongering interventions, but I have to hope that at least for now we are out of the woods when it comes to Iran. I mean, fingers crossed, by the time this video goes online, things might already be different again. David, people who want to find your writing and commentary, where should they go?
Yeah, I would encourage all of your viewers to please go to my Real War Substack website, which is at dpyne.substack.com. Once again, dpyne.substack.com. That's where I post some of my latest articles, and they're usually quite in depth. I might start publishing shorter ones so they can be more timely, because I did have a period where I was too busy to write anything too long, but I really appreciate you having me on your show, and like you, I strongly support the principle of neutrality, even for the United States of America.
That's what we want to work toward, a planet of neutral states, and nobody goes to war with the other one, even. Let's have an ideal. But David, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Pascal. Always a pleasure.